The blizzard had already buried 3 wagons by the time Zelda Morrison realized the men riding beside her were not her protectors, but her executioners. She had hired them in St. Louis 2 weeks prior, 4 rough-looking men who promised safe passage through the territories to Colorado, where her brother had established a mining claim. The journey had been uneventful until they crossed into the wilderness of northern Arkansas, where the November snow fell thick and unforgiving. The leader, a scarred man named Dutch, had grown increasingly agitated as their supplies dwindled. She should have seen it coming when they started whispering among themselves, their eyes lingering too long on the leather satchel she kept close to her body. Inside was nearly $2,000, her entire inheritance from her late father's estate. It was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to build something meaningful far from the suffocating expectations of Missouri society. When Dutch grabbed her wrist that morning and demanded the satchel, she fought. She clawed at his face and screamed into the howling wind, but the other 3 men merely watched with cold indifference. He struck her hard across the temple, and the world tilted sideways. Through blurred vision, she saw him rifle through her belongings, pocketing her money, her mother's jewelry, even the tintype photograph of her parents. Then they dragged her from the wagon and threw her into a snowdrift beside the narrow trail. She landed hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Before she could scramble to her feet, they were already riding away, taking her wagon, her horse, everything. The snow was falling so heavily she could barely see their retreating forms. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to cooperate. The blow to her head had left her dizzy and disoriented. Cold seeped through her woolen coat and layers of skirts within seconds. She called out, her voice weak and desperate, but the wind swallowed her words. The thieves never looked back. Zelda tried to crawl toward what she thought was the trail, but the snow was too deep, too soft. Each movement exhausted her. The cold was unlike anything she had experienced, a living thing that wrapped around her bones and squeezed. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes. She kept moving because stopping meant dying, but her progress was measured in inches. Eventually, she could no longer tell which direction she was moving. The world became nothing but white and wind and cold. She thought of her brother Samuel waiting in Colorado, wondering why she never arrived. She thought of her father, who had raised her to be strong and independent after her mother died of consumption. She thought of all the things she would never do, never see, never become. The injustice of it burned briefly in her chest before the cold extinguished even that. She had survived 22 years, only to die alone in the snow because of greed and cruelty. Time lost all meaning. She might have been in the snow for an hour or a day. Her cries grew weaker until they were barely whispers. The drift slowly buried her and she lacked the strength to push herself free. This was how it ended, she thought. Not with the adventure she had imagined, but with silence and cold and endless white. Then, through the roar of the wind, she heard something. Hoofbeats. A horse moving slowly through the deep snow. She tried to call out, but her voice was gone. She tried to move, but her limbs were frozen. All she managed was a faint, pitiful sound, more whimper than cry. She did not think anyone would hear it over the storm, but someone did. Tobias Everett was no stranger to hard winters. He had grown up in these mountains, the son of a cattle rancher who had carved out a living in the rugged wilderness of northern Arkansas. At 26, he had seen his share of harsh weather, but this particular blizzard was something fierce. He had been checking his trap lines when the snow started falling in earnest, and he knew better than to stay out too long. His cabin was still 3 miles north, and visibility was dropping fast. He was guiding his bay gelding, Copper, carefully along what he thought was the trail when the horse suddenly stopped and whinnied, ears pricked forward. Tobias pulled his scarf down from his face and listened. At first, he heard nothing but wind. Then it came again, so faint he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. A human sound. A cry for help. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Copper, dismounting into snow that reached his knees. He led the horse forward slowly, scanning the white landscape. Everything looked the same, an endless expanse of drifts and buried brush. Then he saw it, a slight discoloration in the snow, a patch that looked different from the rest. He waded toward it, and as he got closer, he realized with horror that he was looking at a person, almost completely buried. Tobias dropped to his knees and began digging with his gloved hands, scooping away armfuls of snow. A face emerged, pale as marble, framed by dark hair plastered to frozen skin. A woman. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue. For a terrible moment he thought she was dead. Then her eyelids fluttered and those eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer sky. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with urgency. "Hold on." He dug faster, uncovering her shoulders, her torso. She was wearing a good wool coat, but it was soaked through. Her gloves were gone, her hands exposed and dangerously white. He pulled her free of the drift and lifted her in his arms. She weighed less than he expected, or perhaps adrenaline made her seem lighter. She made another weak sound, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Stay with me," he commanded, carrying her to Copper. The horse stood steady as Tobias managed to get into the saddle with the woman cradled in front of him. He wrapped his heavy coat around both of them as best he could and urged Copper forward. 3 miles had never seemed so far. The ride to his cabin was a nightmare of wind and snow and fear. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally making small sounds of distress. Tobias kept talking to her, nonsense mostly, just to keep her aware that she was not alone. He told her about his cabin, about the fire he would build, about his mother's recipe for beef stew. Anything to keep her tethered to the world. When the cabin finally appeared through the snow, a dark shape against the white, relief flooded through him. He dismounted carefully and carried her to the door, kicking it open. The interior was cold, the fire long since died to ashes, but it was shelter. He laid her on his bed and immediately set to work building up the fire. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging kindling and logs, coaxing flame from sparks. Within minutes, the fireplace was blazing, heat beginning to spread through the small space. Then he turned his attention to the woman. Her clothes were frozen to her body. He knew he had to get them off, had to warm her core temperature before hypothermia claimed her. He worked quickly and clinically, removing her wet coat, her sodden dress, her layers of undergarments. He averted his eyes as much as possible, focused only on survival. When she was down to her chemise, which was damp but not soaked, he wrapped her in every blanket he owned and pulled her close to the fire. Her skin was like ice. He chafed her hands between his, trying to restore circulation. Her fingers were frighteningly pale, the nails purple. He did the same with her feet, massaging them gently, watching for any sign of frostbite. She was breathing, but shallowly. Her eyes remained closed. Tobias heated water on the fire and soaked cloths in it, wrapping them around her hands and feet. He made weak tea and managed to get a few sips past her lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but some went down her throat. It was something. For hours he worked. He kept the fire roaring. He replaced the cooling cloths with fresh, warm ones. He talked to her, though she showed no sign of hearing. He told her his name, told her she was safe now, told her she was going to live. He said it like a promise, like a prayer. Sometime after midnight, her breathing deepened, becoming more regular. Color began to return to her face, a faint pink flush replacing the deathly pallor. Her fingers twitched in his hands. He felt the knots in his chest begin to loosen. By dawn, the blizzard had blown itself out, leaving the world buried in snow. Tobias had not slept. He sat beside the bed, watching the woman breathe, ready to respond to any change in her condition. As pale sunlight filtered through the cabin's single window, her eyes opened. She stared at him for a long moment, confusion and fear warring in her expression. He held up his hands, palms out, staying very still. "You are safe," he said quietly. "My name is Tobias Everett. I found you in the snow yesterday. You are in my cabin about 15 miles northwest of Eureka Springs, Arkansas." She opened her mouth, but only a croak emerged. He quickly poured water from a pitcher and held the cup to her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed, then drank more. Slowly, he cautioned. When she could speak, her voice was raw. "The men, they took everything." "Who took everything?" "I hired them. In St. Louis. They were supposed to take me to Colorado." Her eyes filled with tears. "They stole my money, all of it. My mother's jewelry. They hit me and left me in the snow." Anger, cold and hard, settled in Tobias's gut. "How many men?" "4. Do you remember what direction they went?" She shook her head weakly. "I could not see. The snow was too heavy." "That is all right. Do not worry about them right now. You need to rest and get warm." He paused. "What is your name?" "Zelda. Zelda Morrison." "Miss Morrison, you are lucky to be alive. If I had not heard you, if Copper had not stopped right there, you would have been buried completely within another hour." "I thought I was dead," she whispered. "I thought it was over." "It is not over. You are alive, and you are going to stay that way." She looked around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture, the fire crackling in the hearth. "Where are my clothes?" "Drying by the fire." "They were soaked through. I had to remove them to warm you up." "I did not look any more than I had to," he added quickly, seeing alarm flash across her face. She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, her cheeks flushing. "You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. But no one else did. You did." He did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. "Are you hungry? I've got some salt pork and beans. It is not fancy, but it is hot." "I am hungry," she admitted. He set about preparing a simple meal, acutely aware of her eyes following his movements. He was not used to having company, especially not a woman. He lived alone by choice, preferring the solitude of the mountains to the noise and complication of town. His parents had died 5 years ago in a wagon accident, and his younger sister had moved to Little Rock to live with their aunt. He visited Eureka Springs once a month for supplies and saw his sister once or twice a year. It was a solitary life, but it suited him, or it had until now. Zelda Morrison was beautiful, even half frozen and wrapped in blankets. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes held intelligence and strength despite her ordeal. There was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of determination, of a will that had refused to surrender even when death seemed certain. He served her a plate of food and watched as she ate slowly, carefully, as if her body had forgotten how. Between bites, she told him her story. Her father had been a lawyer in St. Louis, well respected and moderately wealthy. When he died 6 months ago, he left everything to Zelda, his only surviving child. Her brother Samuel had gone west 3 years earlier, caught up in mining fever, and had written to say he struck silver in Colorado. She decided to join him, to invest her inheritance in his claim and build a new life far from the scrutiny of St. Louis society, where a 22-year-old unmarried woman was viewed with increasing pity and suspicion. "I thought I was being careful," she said bitterly. "I hired men who came recommended. I did not dress fancy or draw attention to myself. I thought I was doing everything right. You could not have known, Tobias said. Bad men hide what they are until it is too late. What will I do now? They took everything. All my money, my jewelry, even my horse and wagon. I have nothing left. You have your life. That is not nothing. But how will I get to Colorado? How will I even get to Eureka Springs? I cannot impose on you forever. You are not imposing. You need to recover before you worry about what comes next. That will take time. She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. Her eyelids drooped, and within moments she was asleep again. Tobias gently took the empty plate from her lap and covered her with another blanket. Then he finally allowed himself to rest, settling into his chair by the fire, listening to the steady sound of her breathing. Over the next 3 days, the world remained buried in snow. Tobias could not have taken Zelda to town even if she had been strong enough to travel. Instead, they fell into an unexpected routine. He tended to his animals, a few chickens in a sheltered coop and copper in the small barn, and kept the cabin warm. Zelda recovered slowly, regaining her strength bit by bit. Her fingers and toes had survived without frostbite, though they were painful and tender as circulation returned. She insisted on helping despite his protests, mending a tear in his shirt with thread from her salvaged belongings, preparing simple meals from his stores. They talked to pass the time, sharing stories of their lives. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother's gentle nature and her father's fierce pride. She spoke of her brother with obvious affection, describing his restless spirit and his conviction that fortune awaited him in the West. Tobias found himself telling her things he had not spoken of in years. He described his parents, his father's determination to make a success of their small ranch, his mother's laughter that had filled their home. He talked about his sister Margaret, who had never liked the isolation of mountain life and flourished in the city. He even told her about the woman he had almost married, a girl from Eureka Springs who decided she wanted a shopkeeper, not a mountain man, and married someone else. "Does it still hurt?" Zelda asked. "No," he said honestly. "It did for a while, but I realized we wanted different things. She would have been miserable up here, and I would have been miserable in town. Better we figured it out before than after." That is very philosophical. I have had a lot of time to think about it. On the 4th day, the sun broke through the clouds properly, and the snow began to melt. Tobias knew they would be able to make the trip to Eureka Springs soon. The thought should have relieved him, but instead, it brought an unexpected sense of loss. He had grown used to Zelda's presence, the sound of her voice, the way she hummed softly while working. The cabin would feel empty when she left. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Zelda asked, "What will you do when you take me to town?" "I suppose I will come back here. This is my home." "You never get lonely?" He considered the question. "Sometimes, but I like the quiet. I like the mountains. I like knowing my closest neighbor is 5 miles away," she smiled. "I think I would have said I needed people around me before all this, but these past few days the quiet has been nice, peaceful, different from St. Louis, very different." She was silent for a moment, staring into the flames. "Tobias, what happens to me when we get to Eureka Springs? I have no money, no possessions. I cannot even send a telegram to my brother because I have nothing to pay with." He had been thinking about this problem. "There is a church in town. Reverend Patterson and his wife are good people. They help those in need. They will find you a place to stay, maybe help you find work until you can contact your brother." I hate being charity. It is not charity. It is people helping people. That is what decent folks do, like you did for me. Exactly like that. She looked at him, her blue eyes intense in the firelight. "I will never forget what you did. You saved my life, Tobias Everett. I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything." "I disagree." She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the arm of his chair. Her touch was warm, alive. "Thank you for everything." He felt something shift in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. He looked at her hand on his, small and delicate but strong in its way, and realized he did not want this to end. He wanted more evenings by the fire, more conversations, more of her laughter when he said something dry and funny. He wanted to know everything about her. But she had a life waiting for her in Colorado, a brother expecting her, plans that did not include a mountain man in Arkansas. "You are welcome," he said softly, and he did not pull his hand away. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The snow had melted enough to make travel possible, though difficult. Tobias prepared copper and helped Zelda into the saddle. She was wearing her dress, cleaned and dried, and his spare coat because hers had been too damaged. She looked small bundled up in the oversized garment. They rode slowly, picking their way along the mountain trail. Zelda held onto Tobias, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. He was acutely aware of every point of contact, the warmth of her even through layers of wool and leather. Eureka Springs appeared in the valley below them around midday, a collection of buildings nestled in the hills, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. It was not a large town, maybe 500 residents, but it was a real community with a church, a general store, a saloon, and a small hotel. Tobias had always thought of it as a place he passed through rather than a place he belonged. But as they descended toward it, he tried to see it through Zelda's eyes. He took her directly to the church, a simple white building with a modest steeple. Reverend Patterson was inside, preparing for Sunday service. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and his wife Abigail was equally warm. When Tobias explained what had happened, leaving out the more delicate details, their expressions filled with sympathy and righteous anger. "Those men should hang for what they done," Reverend Patterson said, his mild voice uncharacteristically hard. "Can the sheriff do anything?" Zelda asked. "Sheriff Cooper is a good man, but tracking thieves in this weather with no clear trail, it would be near impossible," the Reverend admitted. "But we will report it, make sure he knows what to watch for. For now, you will stay with us," Abigail Patterson said firmly, taking Zelda's hand. "We have a spare room and you are welcome as long as you need." "I cannot pay you," Zelda said quietly. "We do not ask for payment. But if you want to help, I could use an extra pair of hands. I teach the children in town and I have been looking for someone to assist me." "I can do that," Zelda said quickly. "I would be happy to help." Tobias felt a strange pang watching the two women, seeing how naturally Abigail drew Zelda into her sphere of care. This was good, he told himself. This was what Zelda needed, the help of good people who could support her until she figured out her next step. But he felt like he was losing something he had barely begun to find. Zelda turned to him. "Will you stay, at least have dinner with us? I should get back before dark." "Please," she said, and the word carried weight. He found himself nodding. "All right, dinner." The meal was pleasant, the Pattersons' good company, the food better than what he cooked for himself. But Tobias felt restless, out of place in the warm, civilized home. He belonged in the mountains, not at a table with china plates and cloth napkins. When the meal ended and darkness had fallen, he could delay no longer. "I need to go," he said, standing. Zelda stood too. "Walk me out." Outside, the night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Their breath made clouds in the air. Zelda wrapped her arms around herself, and Tobias fought the urge to pull her close to share his warmth. "I do not know how to say goodbye to you," she said. "Then do not. Just say you will take care of yourself." "I will take care of myself," she repeated obediently. "Then, will you come back?" To visit, I mean. I come to town for supplies once a month. When will that be? 3 weeks, maybe. That seems like a long time. It will pass quickly. You will be busy with the children. She stepped closer to him. Tobias, I feel like I am leaving something important unfinished. You need time to heal, to figure out what you want to do next. Your brother is waiting in Colorado. What if I do not want to go to Colorado anymore? His heart hammered in his chest. Zelda, you have been through something terrible. You are not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I have in months. She reached up and touched his face, her palm cool against his bearded cheek. I know this seems sudden. I know it does not make sense. But when I was in that snow, dying, I thought about all the things I would never have. And now I am alive, and you are standing in front of me, and I do not want to walk away from whatever this is. He covered her hand with his. You do not even know me. I know you risked your life to save mine. I know you are kind and honorable. I know that when I am with you, I feel safe. I know that I have never felt this way about anyone before. She paused, her eyes searching his. Tell me you do not feel it too, and I will let this go. He could not tell her that because it would be a lie. He felt it, this impossible connection that had formed in just a few days. He felt it in every fiber of his being. I feel it, he admitted, his voice rough. But I do not want you to make decisions based on gratitude or fear. You have been through something terrible. Give yourself time. How much time? The 3 weeks until I come back. If you still feel this way, then we will talk. She nodded slowly. 3 weeks, I will be here. I know you will. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was almost overwhelming, but he held back, afraid of pushing her, afraid of taking advantage of her vulnerability. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and stepped back. Good night, Zelda Morrison. Good night, Tobias Everett. He mounted Copper and rode away without looking back, though he felt her gaze on him the entire way out of town. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Tobias's life. He threw himself into work, checking his trap lines, hunting, chopping firewood, repairing the barn roof. Anything to keep his hands and mind occupied. But every night, sitting by the fire in his suddenly too quiet cabin, he thought about Zelda. He wondered what she was doing, if she was truly healing, if she thought about him. He wondered if she had changed her mind. The possibility haunted him. Maybe once she was settled, surrounded by people, she would realize that what she felt was just gratitude, just the natural attachment of someone to their rescuer. Maybe she would write to her brother and make plans to continue to Colorado. Maybe by the time he rode into Eureka Springs, she would greet him politely but distantly, and he would know it was over before it truly began. But he had promised to come back, so he went. He rode into town on a Tuesday morning, the world washed clean by recent rain. The streets were muddy but navigable, and there were people going about their business, shopping at the general store, talking on corners. He guided Copper toward the church, his stomach tight with nerves. He found Zelda in the small schoolhouse behind the church, surrounded by a dozen children of various ages. She was reading to them, her voice animated, bringing the story to life. She looked different than she had 3 weeks ago. There was color in her cheeks, brightness in her eyes. She looked healthy and happy and beautiful enough to make his chest ache. One of the children noticed him in the doorway and pointed. Zelda looked up, and her face transformed. The smile that spread across her features was like sunrise. "Children, we will continue this after lunch," she said, closing the book. "Go on now." The children filed out, chattering and laughing, casting curious glances at Tobias. When the last one was gone, Zelda walked toward him and he met her halfway. For a moment they just looked at each other. "You came," she said. "I said I would, I know, but I was still afraid you might not. I was afraid you would have changed your mind. I have not changed my mind." She took his hands in hers. These have been the longest 3 weeks of my life, Tobias. I have thought about you every single day. I have tried to tell myself that what I felt was just a reaction to trauma, but it is not. It is real. You are real. This is real. Relief and joy flooded through him. I have thought about you every day too. The cabin feels empty without you. I wrote to my brother, she said. I told him what happened about the thieves and losing everything. I told him about you. I told him I was not coming to Colorado, at least not anytime soon. How did he respond? He has not yet. The mail is slow, but it does not matter what he says. This is my choice, my life. What are you saying, Zelda? I am saying I want to stay here. I want to see where this goes. I want to know you, really know you. I want to wake up every day and see what happens next. She paused. If you want that too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. I want that more than anything. She tilted her face up and he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I have to warn you, he said. I am not easy. I am set in my ways. I like the quiet and the mountains. I am not a town person. I am learning that I am not really a town person either. These past 3 weeks I have felt restless, confined. I miss the space, the quiet of your cabin. You are welcome there anytime. Anytime you want, you can come stay. That would not be proper, she said, but she was smiling. Then I suppose I will have to court you properly. Come to town, take you to dinner, sit in the Pattersons' parlor and make awkward conversation. She laughed. That sounds terrible. It does it not? But I would endure it for you, and I for you. They spent the rest of the day together. He took her to the general store and bought her new gloves with money he had saved from selling furs. She insisted it was too much, but he insisted right back. They walked through the town, talking and laughing, drawing curious looks from residents who knew Tobias only as the quiet mountain man who kept to himself. They ate dinner at the small hotel restaurant, and Tobias felt awkward and out of place in his rough clothes among the other diners, but Zelda looked at him like he was the only person in the room. When he finally had to leave, they stood again outside the church, reluctant to part. When will I see you again? She asked. I can come back in a week if you want. I want. Then I will be here. He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and when he rode away, he carried the memory of her with him like a talisman. The next few months passed in a blur of joy and discovery. Tobias came to town every week, sometimes twice a week, making the long ride because being with Zelda was worth any inconvenience. They walked together, talked for hours, learned each other's rhythms and patterns. She told him about her dreams, about wanting to make a difference, to build something meaningful. He told her about his love for the land, for the simplicity of mountain life. In April, Samuel Morrison wrote back. His letter was concerned and protective, questioning whether Zelda was making a wise choice, but ultimately supporting her decision. He sent money, a portion of his mining profits, insisting she have something of her own. Zelda cried when she read the letter, relief and love for her brother overwhelming her. He says he might visit in the summer, she told Tobias, showing him the letter. He wants to meet you. That is fair. I want to meet him too. Are you nervous? Should I be? He can be overprotective. He is your brother. Of course he is protective. I would be too. In May, Tobias asked Zelda to marry him. It was not a grand gesture, no elaborate plan or fancy ring. They were sitting by the creek behind the church, watching the water flow, and he simply turned to her and said, "Marry me, Zelda. Be my wife." She stared at him, her blue eyes wide. "Are you serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend every day with you. I want to build a life together. Your cabin is small. We will make it bigger. I do not know anything about mountain life. I will teach you. What if I am terrible at it? Then we will figure it out together. He took her hands. I am not offering you an easy life, Zelda. It will be hard work and long winters and isolation. But I am offering you my whole heart, everything I am, everything I have. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, yes, I will marry you. He kissed her, tasting salt and joy, and knew he was the luckiest man alive. They were married in June, in the small white church with Reverend Patterson officiating. The whole town came, curious and supportive in equal measure. Zelda wore a simple dress that Abigail Patterson helped her make, and she carried wildflowers that Tobias had picked that morning. He wore his best clothes, which were still worn and plain, but Zelda looked at him like he was dressed in finest silk. Margaret traveled from Little Rock for the wedding, and she and Zelda took to each other immediately, bonding over their shared exasperation and affection for Tobias. Samuel could not make it, still tied up with his mining operation, but he sent a generous gift and a letter full of blessings and dire warnings to Tobias about treating his sister right. After the ceremony, there was a simple celebration with food and music. Tobias endured the socializing because it made Zelda happy, but he was relieved when they were finally able to leave, riding Copper up into the mountains toward home. Zelda looked around the cabin with new eyes when they arrived. "This is ours now," she said wonderingly. "This is ours," he confirmed. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense, learning each other with tenderness and passion. Later, wrapped in blankets by the dying fire, Zelda traced patterns on Tobias's chest and said, "I think I fell in love with you the moment I opened my eyes and saw you watching over me. I think I fell in love with you when you insisted on helping even though you could barely stand. You are stubborn, Zelda Everett. I learned from my husband. That is fair. Life in the mountains was indeed hard work. Tobias taught Zelda how to tend the chickens, how to preserve food for winter, how to read the weather in the forest. She learned to shoot, though she never loved it, and to track animals, which she found fascinating. She was not naturally suited to the physical labor, but she approached it with determination and good humor. When she failed at something, she laughed and tried again. She brought changes to the cabin, too. She made curtains for the window, planted a garden in the small clearing, filled the space with small touches that made it feel more like a home and less like a shelter. She read to Tobias in the evenings, books she had saved from her old life or borrowed from the Pattersons. He loved listening to her voice, the way she brought stories alive. In September, they began building an addition to the cabin, a larger room that would serve multiple purposes. Tobias did most of the heavy work, but Zelda helped where she could, handing him tools, holding boards steady. It took them 2 months, working around other chores, but when it was finished, they both felt proud of what they had built together. That winter was brutal, weeks of snow and cold that confined them to the cabin for days at a time. But it was also beautiful. They were completely alone, just the two of them, and they filled the long, dark hours with conversation, with lovemaking, with comfortable silence. Zelda sometimes spoke about her old life, about St. Louis and her father, but always with a sense of nostalgia rather than regret. She was happy, she told Tobias often, happier than she had ever been. "Even though you almost died in the snow," he teased one evening, "especially because of that. If those men had not robbed me, if you had not found me, I would be in Colorado right now, probably miserable and lonely, wondering if I made a mistake. Instead, I am here with you, and I have never felt more sure of anything. I am glad you are here, even if it happened in the worst possible way." Life is strange like that. The worst moments can lead to the best ones. In March, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Tobias one morning over breakfast, her voice nervous and excited. He stared at her for a long moment, processing the information, then got up and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. "We are having a baby," he said, setting her down gently. "We are having a baby," she confirmed. "Are you scared?" "Terrified. But also happy." "Are you?" "Same. But we will figure it out just like everything else." The pregnancy was relatively easy. Zelda had some sickness in the early months, but it passed. As her belly grew, Tobias became increasingly protective, insisting she not overwork herself, doing extra chores to compensate. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, occasionally having to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. In October, with the leaves turning brilliant colors and the air crisp with approaching cold, Zelda went into labor. Tobias rode to town and brought back Abigail Patterson, who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tobias, waiting outside, feared he might lose them both. But Zelda was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when he finally heard the cry of a baby, relief and joy overwhelmed him. Abigail emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "You have a son. Both mother and baby are healthy." Tobias went in to find Zelda propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tired eyes full of love. "Meet your son," she said. He approached carefully, awestruck by the tiny person in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they opened briefly, were blue like his mother's. "He is perfect," Tobias whispered. "He is ours," Zelda said. They named him Thomas after Tobias's father, and the cabin that had once felt too small suddenly felt exactly right. Thomas was a good baby, relatively calm, though he woke often in the night. Tobias and Zelda took turns walking him, soothing him, learning his patterns and needs. It was exhausting and wonderful. Samuel finally visited that spring when Thomas was 6 months old. He arrived unannounced, riding up the mountain trail on a fine horse, looking weathered and prosperous. Zelda cried when she saw him, running into his arms. The brothers embraced for a long time, and when they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Samuel stayed for a week, getting to know Tobias, playing with his nephew, seeing his sister's new life. On his last evening, he and Tobias sat outside while Zelda put Thomas to bed. "I was angry when I got her first letter," Samuel admitted. "I thought maybe you had taken advantage of her, that she was confused and making bad decisions. I do not blame you for thinking that, but I was wrong. She is happy, truly happy, and you are good to her. I can see that. I love her more than anything. I know, thank you for saving her life." "Thank you for giving her a home." Samuel paused. "I am going to settle in Colorado, really settle. I am tired of chasing claims. I am going to buy land, build something permanent. I would like for you all to visit sometime. We will. Maybe next summer when Thomas is older. I would like that." Life settled into a rhythm. The seasons cycled through their familiar patterns. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and energetic, exploring the world around him. Zelda taught him letters and numbers, while Tobias taught him about the forest and animals. When Thomas was 3, Zelda became pregnant again, and this time the labor was easier. They welcomed a daughter in the spring, naming her Catherine after Zelda's mother. The cabin felt crowded with 4 people, so they built another addition, creating 2 small bedrooms for the children. It was hard work, but satisfying. Their family was growing, their home expanding to accommodate them. When Thomas was 6 and Catherine 3, they made the long journey to Colorado to visit Samuel. He had indeed settled, building a ranch in the mountains with money from his mining success. He was married now, too, to a woman named Julia who was warm and funny. The 2 families bonded immediately, and the visit stretched from a planned 2 weeks to a month. "You could stay," Samuel suggested one evening. "There is plenty of land here. We could be neighbors." Tobias and Zelda looked at each other. They had discussed this possibility during the journey, knowing Samuel might make such an offer. "It is tempting," Zelda said, "but Arkansas is our home. The cabin, the mountains, that is where we belong." "I understand," Samuel said, and he did. They returned to Arkansas with promises to visit more often, and they kept those promises. Every few years, they made the journey west, or Samuel and Julia came east. The children grew up knowing their cousins, bonding over summers spent exploring and playing. Life was not without challenges. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, illnesses that scared them, moments of doubt and frustration. But through it all, Tobias and Zelda held onto each other. Their love, forged in crisis and hardship, proved strong enough to weather anything. When Thomas was 10 and Catherine 7, Zelda became pregnant a third time unexpectedly. She was older now, 35, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones. Tobias worried constantly, but Zelda remained optimistic. In the late autumn, she gave birth to another daughter, small but healthy. They named her Margaret after Tobias's sister, who had become one of Zelda's closest friends despite the distance between them. With 3 children, life was chaotic and loud, the cabin always full of voices and laughter. Tobias sometimes missed the quiet of his old solitary life, but he would not trade what he had for anything. He loved his family fiercely, protectively, grateful every single day for the twist of fate that had brought Zelda into his world. The children grew, as children do. Thomas became tall and serious like his father, with a deep love for the mountains. Catherine was creative and spirited, always drawing or making up stories. Little Margaret was thoughtful and gentle, with her mother's intelligence and kindness. When Thomas was 16, he announced that he wanted to stay in the mountains, to build his own cabin nearby and make his life there. Tobias felt both pride and sadness, knowing his son was becoming a man, ready to forge his own path. Catherine, at 13, was already talking about becoming a teacher like her mother had been, wanting to help children learn. Margaret, at 6, was still figuring out her place, but she showed signs of her aunt's restless spirit. As the years passed, Tobias and Zelda began to slow down. The hard work of mountain life took its toll, but they faced aging together with the same partnership that had defined their marriage. They spent more time sitting on the porch Tobias had built, watching the sunset, holding hands, reminiscing about the long, strange journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked one evening when they were both in their 50s. "Staying here, living this hard life?" "Never," Zelda said firmly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be. Even though those men robbed you, even though you almost died. I have thought about that a lot over the years. It was horrible and terrifying, and I would not wish that experience on anyone. But it led me to you. It led me to this life, to our children, to everything we built together. How can I regret that? I am glad you stayed. I am glad you found me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Somewhere inside, their children were preparing dinner, their voices drifting through the open door. This was home, this was family, this was the life they had created from nothing. Thomas did build his cabin, just a mile up the trail. He married a woman from Eureka Springs, a practical girl named Alina who took to mountain life with surprising ease. They gave Tobias and Zelda their first grandchild, a boy they named Henry. Catherine moved to Little Rock to pursue her dream of teaching, staying with Aunt Margaret while she trained. She wrote long letters home, full of enthusiasm and determination. Eventually, she returned to Eureka Springs and opened a school, becoming a beloved figure in the community. Margaret, true to her namesake's spirit, wanted to travel. At 18, she left Arkansas to see the world, a decision that terrified her parents, but they supported because they knew she needed to find her own way. She sent postcards from St. Louis, from Chicago, from places Zelda and Tobias had never seen. Eventually, she settled in Denver, working as a journalist writing stories that made her parents proud. Tobias and Zelda grew old together in the cabin that had been their first home. They watched their grandchildren grow, hosted family gatherings that filled the space with noise and joy, tended their garden, and cared for their animals. They moved slower, talked about their aches and pains, but they never lost the connection that had formed that terrible, wonderful day in the snow. On a cool autumn evening, when Tobias was 68 and Zelda 64, they sat on their porch watching another sunset. The trees were brilliant with color and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. "I want to tell you something," Zelda said, her voice soft. "What is that?" "I am the happiest woman alive. Despite everything, maybe because of everything, I have lived the most beautiful life. And it is all because of you." Tobias squeezed her hand. "I was just a man who happened to hear your cry. You are the one who chose to stay, who chose to build this life. We built it together. That is what made it beautiful." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside, they could hear Catherine and her husband, who were visiting with their children. The house was full again, full of life and love and family. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Zelda asked. "When I opened my eyes and saw you, I said I had got you, that you should hold on. You did have me. You have had me every day since, and I held on just like you told me to, and I am glad, so very glad." As the stars began to appear, they went inside together, greeted by the warmth and chaos of family. They ate dinner surrounded by people they loved, and later in the quiet of their bedroom they held each other close, grateful for every moment, every choice, every challenge that had brought them to this place. Years continued to pass. Tobias's health began to fail when he was in his early 70s, his body worn down by decades of hard labor. Zelda nursed him with patient devotion, their children and grandchildren visiting often. On a winter morning with fresh snow falling softly outside, Tobias passed away peacefully in his sleep, Zelda holding his hand. The loss nearly broke her. After 50 years together, she did not know how to exist without him. But her children surrounded her with love and support, and gradually, she found her way forward. She stayed in the cabin, unable to imagine leaving it, and Thomas and Alina moved in to help care for her. She lived for another 7 years, watching more grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She told stories about Tobias, about their life together, about the day he saved her from the snow. She wanted everyone to know how extraordinary he had been, how much he had meant. On a spring morning with wildflowers blooming in the meadow and the world alive with birdsong, Zelda died quietly, just shy of her 81st birthday. Her family buried her beside Tobias on the hillside overlooking the cabin, under a pair of oak trees they had planted together decades ago. Catherine spoke at the service, reading from a letter her mother had written years before, to be opened after her death. "I want you all to know that I lived a life of profound joy," the letter said. "I was loved and I loved in return. I built a home, raised a family, and found meaning in every day. My life began in the snow, in darkness and cold, when I thought all was lost. But then I heard a voice telling me to hold on, and I did. I held on to Tobias, to our love, to the life we created together. And it was more than I ever dreamed possible. Do not mourn me. Celebrate the life I lived, the love I knew, and if you can find even a fraction of the happiness I found, you will be truly blessed." The family grieved, but they also celebrated, sharing memories and stories late into the night. They talked about Tobias's dry humor and steady strength, about Zelda's determination and warmth. They remembered the way their love had been obvious to everyone who saw them together, the way they had always reached for each other, the way they had built something beautiful from nothing. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. Thomas's grandson eventually took it over, restoring it carefully, preserving it as a memorial to the great-grandparents he had never met but knew through stories. The community in Eureka Springs remembered the story too, the tale of the woman left for dead, and the mountain man who saved her becoming local legend. But for those who knew them, who loved them, Tobias and Zelda were more than a legend. They were proof that love could bloom in the unlikeliest circumstances, that strength could be found in gentleness, that two people could forge a life of meaning and joy through partnership and devotion. The mountains remembered them. The cabin remembered them. Their family remembered them. And in the remembering, their love lived on, a testament to the power of holding on when all seems lost, to choosing each other every day, to building a life one moment at a time. The snow that had nearly claimed Zelda's life that terrible day had long since melted, but the warmth she and Tobias created together endured, passed down through generations, a legacy of love that would never fade.